All right, everyone. So, the Asia Champions League in Pokemon Unite is just around the corner, so I wanted to make my predictions about what is going to happen here. Just a few days ago, we got the groups. These are the four groups, Group A, B, C, and D, and so I wanted to make a bit of a prediction. First, I think the two teams most likely to win this tournament are going to be Fennel over here in Group B and Luminosity Gaming, which is found down here in Group D, the Group of Death, in my opinion. And the reason is because these two teams have a proven history of being able to perform with the highest stakes on the line, and that is the World Championships. They're the only two teams that have won world titles, and so I think that gives them an edge. It's one thing for a team to be really, really good, but it's another thing to prove that you can win big games under a lot of pressure, and these two teams have done it. The two teams that I find really, really interesting right now are almost in an identical spot, and the two I want to highlight right here are FN Esports, previously known as Mirai and Sejong, previously known as Zora Tigers Gaming last year, and also Zeta Division over here, previously known as Kabachan's last season as well. So these two teams also have a pretty good record. They both made pretty darn good runs last World Championships. Zeta Division, in fact, are the reigning champions of the Asia Champions League from last season. So both of them have really good performances to their name. The problem is for the majority of this season, both of these two teams have been underperforming. FN Esports a little bit to a worse degree than Zeta Division. I mean, they barely qualified to the playoff round of the Asia Champions League qualifiers. And both of these teams, when they did barely qualify to the final round, they were seeded very poorly and immediately got knocked off to the loser stage and then made an incredible run. FN Esports actually made it all the way to winning the whole thing, taking out the same team that knocked them into group stage, Alter Ego, if I'm not mistaken. And Zeta Division ended up winning the whole thing as well. Actually, after losing the very first round, they beat Fennel 2-1 at the very end. One thing that I didn't know about Fennel until very recently is that Mashio appears to no longer, or sorry, not Mashio, Lucapo appears to no longer be on this team, despite his name appearing here. This is something I heard on the Unite Mike's podcast. So if that is the case, that definitely is a bit of a blow to Fennel. I still think that they deserve the spot of one of the favorites to win this competition. Now, Zeta and FN Esports are in this tricky spot of how do we rank them? Do we rank them off of their past tournament history? They do tend to pull up a lot in tournaments when the stakes are high. Do we rate them off of their overall condition this season? And I think if that were the case, their average just hasn't been very good. They've lost so many games to teams that they should have had an even fight against. There's so many of them, both of them, or that they straight up should have beaten. So that kind of points to the idea that, well, maybe they might underperform here. But we can also rate them based off of what they accomplished very recently, which was those incredible Cinderella runs that both of them pulled off to beat their entire region and snag the first place in the qualification round. So I don't know. Both of those are tricky. I'm going to say it right here. I wouldn't be surprised if either of these teams falls in the group stage. I would not be surprised if either of these teams wins the tournament. That's how up in the air this is. I am going to lean a little bit more toward just the fact that their past history and very recent history has shown them to be very powerful competitors. I think they are more likely than not to do pretty well in this tournament, but they could also not. Like I said, they've looked very poor for a lot of this season. A story that is almost identical to that, but in a region that is not as hyped, is Godlike Esports over here, that qualified first in the Indian region, where they also were the second to last seed, I believe, and ended up defeating all of the Indian teams. I wouldn't say they didn't run away with the games per se, but I mean, it shows that they knew how to win, this Godlike team. So they're looking like potential dark horses here. Of course, there is one more Indian team over here, Revenant X Spark, which does have a lot of players from last season's team True Gravity, which I thought this was just straight up True Gravity for a long time because I recognize so many of these players. But in fact, what actually happened is that most of True Gravity went to Godlike Esports at the beginning of the season when that was created, and tons of them left, almost all of them left, and then they eventually reformed into Revenant X Spark, which is a really interesting story. We, of course, have two Chinese teams here, and I'm going to say very little about them because we just haven't seen them play this game, so it would be a little bit unfair of me to rank them. I am going to assume that they will not make it out of group stage, and that could be me just underestimating them, but really I have actually no information to go off of, right? So it would also just be unfair to guess. One team that is a little bit of the opposite of those that I had just mentioned is Paper Rex over here. This team has always been known as MYS, and recently they have changed to they were signed by Paper Rex. So this team is probably on paper the strongest team in the entire Southeast Asian region, but they have a really poor history of actually winning tournaments, at least since I've been watching Unite, which was near the end of the second year. This is one of those teams that just nobody wants to face. They're really solid. They're usually consistent enough, but they just have this history of going up against an opponent that, sure, they might be strong, but Paper Rex is usually a little stronger, and they just lose to them, and their run just ends. They usually are pretty good at making it out of groups in tournaments, so I don't expect they'll have much of a problem here. I could be wrong, of course. Anything can happen in these tournaments. And unfortunately, Onic Rise is in this group as well. Onic Rise is a very strong team, and they actually do have a really good history in tournaments as well. However, they have a really poor history against Paper Rex, against MYS. They've beaten them once earlier this season, but then they lost to them twice when they met in the qualification round, which actually forced Onic Rise to have to qualify through the APAC West Winter Open, as opposed to just straight up qualifying through the Southeast Asian tournament, of which Paper Rex got 4th place. The team that knocked them down is a team I'll call myself out here for wrongfully hating on them for a while here, Buriram United Esports. So at first, Buriram started beating everyone, but they started doing that barely, they'd be losing the entire game and then win at the end, and I just thought it was a fluke for a long time. Now, at this point in the season, I think we're past the point where we can call it a fluke. They've definitely proven themselves to be something, and as mad as I was at this team, I'm very glad to see that they didn't get a very easy group here. This is literally the group of death, so if they make it out, it is going to be completely on their merit. They figured out how to beat these 3 other really strong teams. I'm just a player that really likes the early game, and I really don't love the teams that just lose the entire game and then just flip the Ray fight and on its head and win from there. But Buriram they've been growing. I mean, they don't win like that all the time anymore, like we were seeing at the very start of the qualification process. They have 2 players, I believe, Pufasa and SAGSGC, that were from the Worlds team last year, Kekalok. The rest of them were on Full Sense. But they've got some really good players, like Rainy Day is a really strong player on their team, and they've been putting up really, really good results. So Alter Ego, which went all the way to the winners' finals before they were dropped in the Southeast Asian Championships by the team they had beaten at first, which is FN Esports, known as Mirai and Sejong back then. They are also super hard to predict, because, man, they put up a good run there, but just like FN Esports, they had not had a very consistent run up to that point, up to the final championship bracket run. They were dropping a lot of games to teams that they probably should have beaten or should have put up more of a fight against. And these guys, they don't have the greatest tournament report. Again, they do often get out of group just fine, but then they'll choke somewhere along the line. And this is the group with Xingdi and with Ice, and a lot of really good longtime players here. So it's really hard to know, even if they'll make it out of group, and if they do, how far they would go. This is like a mini version of what I said about Zeta, what I said about FN Esports. They could make a really deep run. They could also just get dropped right here in the group. So I really have no idea. So the Japanese teams, also really hard for me to rank outside of Fennel, Zeta. We've got Nagoya Oja, which, I don't know, I'm not really feeling them super much. They did put up a pretty good run in the last qualification round, but they weren't seeded very highly going into them. And sometimes that can happen. A team can put up a pretty good performance and then not do very well when it counts. That happened to True Gravity from India last season, where they had an amazing run at this very tournament, the Asia Champions Leagues, where they took 2nd place. But then they didn't qualify for the World Championships. They lost out to S8UL Esports at the end. So sometimes doing really well in a tournament doesn't necessarily mean that that's your true power level. Sometimes you just have a really strong run. So it's really hard to rate things like that. Insomnia, I have a little bit more faith in. Insomnia is where Obuyan is. It's a player I knew from Secret Ship back in the day. So he's pretty good. What have I not talked about yet? Talon? Talon brought in a player from the other Filipino team, Junior Absent here, which that team, Elevate, was... I think they were called Omo Abyssinian back in 2023 that made it all the way to the finals before losing to Luminosity in the grand finals. So that team was very strong. They did struggle just a little bit in the APAC East Winter Open, but I think that was just the players just growing used to each other for a little bit because we swapped out... who was their old... I think KYY was the name of the support player. And they brought in Junior Absent over here. I don't remember if he replaced the support player directly. I just remember they were given some trouble by, I want to say Blacklist International was the other team that was there. But they did win, and I expect them to be stronger. Same with Onic Rise. They were struggling just a little bit in the West Winter Open. They didn't steamroll it like we thought they would. But I expect them to be pretty strong. Onic Rise has a good track record in tournaments. In fact, they got 3rd place at the World Championships just this past season. So... without further ado, I'm going to go into predictions here. I'm going to say in Group A, this one's tough. I think Insomnia might be the most consistent here. This team, the Korean team, they get really scary when the stakes get this high. But not necessarily always at the start. Revenant X-Spark put on a great run at the ACL last season, at least in the form of True Gravity. But they did get knocked down first and climbed through the losers bracket. I am going to go here with FN Esports in first place, and I'm going to give it to Insomnia in second. But again, lots of question marks for me, but that's what I'm going to choose. FN Esports and then Insomnia. Group B, I do think Fennel is the most consistent of these, like by far. And I'm going to have to give it still to Alter Ego in the second place here. So... I am kind of snubbing out India here. I do believe they can make it out of group. They could even make it out of both groups. But I just don't think... I haven't seen enough consistency from them to say with certainty that they would. So I'm going to go with Fennel in first from Group B, Alter Ego in second from Group B. Group C, Paper X is my favorite here. I have Paper X going through. I also have Onic Rise going through. I think Onic Rise pulls up really well in tournaments like these. I don't think that Rise will beat Paper X, which is why I'm going to have Paper X in first, and I'm going to have Rise going through in second. And then finally in Group D, this is the really big one. This you could just pull stuff out of a hat. I think the world kind of accepts that Luminosity is the strongest team here. Luminosity has won so many tournaments over in the West, and we're going to see how well that translates over here. It's just one tournament, so it's not going to be a lot to gauge information, but everyone's going to wait to see, if Luminosity gets dropped in groups, everyone's going to point to, see, this is how much stronger the East is than the West. If Luminosity wins this tournament, everyone's going to be saying, well, they're unrivaled. There's no one in the world better than Luminosity. So there's a lot of stories to be written here. I do think that Luminosity is going to get out of this group, and man, this is tough. I really would hate to see any of these three teams drop out of the group, and two of them probably will. I'm going to go ahead and guess that Buriram United Esports, they are going through. They've just been so consistent, more so than the other two teams here, Talon and Zeta Division. And so I could literally see this group going anywhere. But if I have to pick, I'm going to go Luminosity in first, Buriram United in second. So what we have is the four champions of the groups, which would be FN Esports from Korea over here, Fennel from Japan, the winner of this group, Paper X from Malaysia, Singapore. They'd be first over here, and then Luminosity would be first from Group D. So those, I believe the way it works is instead of just swapping, so the first place from Group A fights the second place from Group B, etc., I think they might be doing what they did at the World Championships, which I don't really love, which is where the first place teams just end up picking their opponent from whoever's left. So that makes things really tricky to see what the bracket is going to look like here. But in terms of who is going to take down this tournament, I do think that Luminosity does have the best shot. As for the team I'm going to be rooting for, as always, I'm a really big Paper X fan, and I would really love for them to prove themselves in the form of getting some silverware at a really big tournament, because they've been on top of their region for so long. I really want them to do something to earn more of that respect that they deserve over here. The team I am most scared of spiking this tournament is probably going to be FN Esports from Korea. I don't know, something about this team. You play them in a regular season where the stakes aren't that high and they just feel so mediocre, but something about high stakes tournaments just turns this entire team into a team full of demons, and they will just take down the best in the world. So that's what I'm thinking. Those are my thoughts. You can let me know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see if we're correct here. Thanks for watching.